So Paul, tell me about who you are and what you do here.
Sure. So my name is Paul. I am the co-creative director here at TFP, and my job is to work with Paul to identify, articulate, and evangelize a set of creative visions for the studio, both internally and to Activision or whoever our partners are.
So I'm going to take it back quite a bit. Tell me about your childhood. What did you play with as a kid? What do you like? What do you enjoy doing?
My childhood was a mixture of collecting action figures, reading comic books, watching Saturday morning cartoons, playing games, Nintendo games. It was a bunch of different toys in all of these different vectors, and what I ultimately came to become was an animator, and that was about storytelling with a bunch of this was a perfect environment for us, which was taking toys and characters and a cartoon aesthetic and telling stories. So it's just a place that it was a perfect fit for me.
So how did you end up at Toys for Bob?
Wow. So at Toys for Bob, I actually have a really close relationship with Eway. I was working full-time as a web developer or something in Silicon Valley, and I was going at the same time to school to study animation, and I had thought that I was going to go into film, but I serendipitously met Eway. He went to the same school, and he was working at Toys for Bob at the time, and he wanted to give back. And so on the weekends in the summer, he was teaching some special course, like a master course or something like that. And I enrolled one of the few. I think I was one of 3 people in that class because it was on a Saturday in the summer. It was like 6 hours. No one wanted to be there. And so I was there, and we just really hit it off. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, do you want to work for games?" And I said, "No," because I really wanted to make movies.
Yeah.
But he brought me into the studio and he showed me around, and the culture just was a great fit. And I loved working with Eway. He's just a creative person, and all of that just worked together. And over the years, just really fell in love with everything that we built here.
So what year was that? Did you join about?
It was about 2005.
And what did you start working on when you first came here?
Let's see, I was on the tail end of Madagascar 1. So at the time we were doing a lot of games for movies.
Licensed properties.
Right.
Yep.
And then I think I immediately rolled on to a launch title for the Wii, which was Tony Hawk Downhill Jam.
And then Skylanders came into your life eventually, so.
Yeah, that was around 2008, was it? I'm bad with the dates.
Yeah, and dates are hard to remember exactly which date it was. So how did you first hear about the project? How did you first get involved with it?
So there was, I think we just wrapped on Madagascar 2, and what we were looking for was another project to launch on. And Activision I think there was the merger between Activision and Vivendi had just occurred, so their catalog came over. Spyro and Crash was something that we were asked to think about because it's like a natural fit for a studio like us. So we were both evaluating both opportunities, and that was just, Paul put out an open call to say, "Hey, what are you guys interested in?" And so there's just a lot of crazy conversations about, like, what if we did this, and what if we did this, what if it was a Crash thing, what if it was a Spyro thing? And then I just remember there was pockets of activity. Eway was just building sculptures for some reason, like I don't know why, but it landed us in a great place. And then game designers were doing their thing, they were doing prototypes. At the time, I was lead of the animation team, and as I was telling you a little bit earlier, we are typically at the tail end of the pipeline. We're usually waiting for story decisions, we're waiting for assets like models and all that stuff to come down to us so that we can actually bring them to life. So I was saying, how can we be relevant in this early incubated ideation phase? What are the skills that animators can bring to the story? And I think as an animator, we're really good at, one, communicating non-verbally, and concentrating ideas and distilling them into their purest form so that it's super, super clear. That's just one of the things that animators are constantly thinking about. And so in the prototype process, we didn't know what we were making. There's just lots of maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. So our team sat down and said, let's take all of those maybes and sketch them out in storyboard form so that they sort of have like, maybe this is a feature, maybe this is a feature, maybe this is a feature. And our end goal was to take all those things, assemble it into something cohesive and something that was clear that could be used as a pitch. And that, in the form of it, we didn't know fully at the time, but what we ended up with was a fake commercial. A fake commercial that was built in a really scrappy form as storyboards as an animatic. And that proved to be a really, really powerful communication method of what our vision was.
Who were you communicating that with? I mean, who were you sharing that people? Activision? Was that internally within the studio? Was that broader audience?
It was anyone who would listen. So I think first it was internally because, there's so many competing ideas, right? Are we making an MMO or are we making,
Yeah.
who knows? And so that was one way of clarifying and just seeing what sticks, what makes sense in the context of the other things that we were excited about. And then later taking that in a more polished form to Activision as our publisher, and even to people like Nintendo, like platform first-party people, to say, hey, this is what we're interested in building, and it's totally weird, and you've never seen this before, but this is where we're headed.
What surprised you in the process of going from those first beginnings to, say, the release of the first game?
Surprises. I don't know if this is a surprise, but it was constantly a shifting unknown, which was the role of Spyro. So part of the whole thrust of this was we've got the Spyro IP, what can we do with it? So I think internally we were just constantly saying, is this a game about Spyro? Is he the central character, or is it a wider cast? Like, collectability was a huge part of it, so he couldn't put so much weight on one character. Is he an NPC who's like fathering this cast of heroes? And for a while, Spyro was not a playable character at all. He was like this central father for these like smaller heroes. So the way that it turned, we thought that we were going to ship a game that was going to be called Spyro's Kingdom or something along those lines. And when it became its own IP with Skylanders, its own identity, that was really interesting and magical to see.
And one of the things about Skylanders that was really interesting is that it's a lot of different types of play wrapped up in one product. I mean, you have gameplay, traditional video game play. You have collecting, which is another form of play. You have that pretend imaginative play because you have a figure that a kid can actually look into the eyes of that character in a very physical, tangible sense. Did it feel different working in this sort of game than say Madagascar 2 or something like that?
Oh, totally. With licensed property like Madagascar, a lot of what you're doing is trying to chase someone else's vision or what the movie is trying to do, and you're trying to be authentic to that.
Yeah.
With Skylanders, we had this awesome creative license to just come up with anything, and so that was an amazing freedom,
Yeah.
and it was a huge difference.
Can you tell me a little bit about the process of actually working on the game? So, how did you guys, to what extent were you pursuing your own vision? Were you doing focus groups to test different things? If so, did you adjust it going forward? Do you feel like, we just nailed it, didn't need to adjust it that much? Well, just walk me through the process of developing the game from your perspective.
It's a little bit blurry for me, but I know that early on it was really just us making stuff for ourselves passionately. I don't think we had very much focus group until we got the eye of the publisher and we started, risk management and like who exactly. So there suddenly became like consultants dropped in or like people from the publisher side came in. And not to dismiss that, I mean, they had some great input,
Right.
but it was just a lot more voices were part of the conversation, and
Yeah.
we wanted to listen, and we had focus groups at that point, which we ultimately ignored. I mean, it's really interesting because you're trying to juggle a lot of different things, and we don't know what exactly it is, but we know that, especially Paul and you were leading the creative on what the characters are looking like. We're just going to go straight for it, and it landed in great places.
What were differences in the different games over the years? Was the same process throughout, different sort of experiences? Because each has their own feel, their own twist to them.
Right. Well, there's a couple obvious ones. One is that we had a 2-year production. We started to shift to this 2-year production thing where we're bouncing between annual release with BD.
Yeah.
So you'll see a big difference just in
Yeah.
tech and cultural and just
Right.
different perspectives of how that is. But also, Skylanders is really unique from a game perspective because we put it on ourselves to innovate on the hardware first. That is the defining feature, and a game came out of that. So every year, I think the most significant one was Trap Team, and we had this idea that instead of taking a character and bringing it to life, now you're going to take a virtual character and pull it into the physical world. So that idea was like really captured. Like that's definitely the direction. We know it's feasible. How do we pull it off? And just the iteration that we had, like sound, the sound team played a huge role in defining what
Sucking
the
the monster into there.
Yeah, and how do you communicate the magic of it being alive? We danced around do we have visuals, or is there like a screen, and it just got expensive. Super interesting, and those are challenges that I doubt probably any traditional video game companies are tackling because it's hardware.
Yeah. So you use this term magic, which I've heard a lot in talking to people here already. So from your perspective, what did you really struggle with or had to work out, or maybe found instantly, but to bring a certain magic to the game? Because a lot of it is this feeling, I hear terms like feeling and magic, that sort of thing, that really makes it seamless and work well. What's, from the work you were doing, how do you bring the magic?
So, for me personally, I think about that maybe in 2 different ways. And one is, magic is a way of describing complication beyond your understanding. And so, working backwards from that, if you take something that's highly technical, you've got RFID communication with this, and it's all wireless, and it's going to, okay, if you can obfuscate that with Dazzle, you're starting to inch your way towards magic. So that's one way of thinking about it. Another way is in being really observant of the human experience of it. So, as we were designing the magic moment, in the early days, we're thinking about it as, the toys are just a character selection screen. So you put the character on there, and then obviously a menu just shows up. And the menu, just automatically takes you to whatever hardware that you put on there. I mean, because we were thinking conventionally about, like, it's a character select. So character select is a menu. And that doesn't feel magical, because there's just all this, you're still revealing the technical aspects of things. So we're trying to put a gloss over that, and then we paid a lot of attention to what is the physical action that you're doing. We knew that we had to have a flat base, and watching people interact with it, people weren't just putting it on, they weren't sliding it on, they were holding it and they were slamming it. And really that action of this vertical motion of taking your hand, putting it, starting up high and taking it down, or even when you're removing it, is lifting. We played that graphically a lot into the magic moment, so the characters are literally ripped out of this virtual world. We go to this new environment that's nebulous and time stands still. All those themes got reflected in the audio as well. All the sound slows down into this moment where it's safe now to make a decision. When you slam it on, it's really explosive. We want to just enhance all these things that's happening in the real world. So that's another point of magic, I think, is just dazzling up what's happening in reality.
This conversation that's happening between what's going on the screen and what's happening in real life is really sort of, adding to the magic.
And that should feel like a singular experience.
Right. Yeah, you're not breaking the illusion at all. You're in there. Everything about it, from the physical to what's going on the screen.
Right.
It's great. Quick question. Who's your favorite character?
It's like, who's your favorite kid? I can't really...
I'm going to pin you down here. At this moment, we'll say at this very moment.
At this moment, it's got to be Pop Fizz. I think Pop Fizz's ability to... he's our alchemist. He's our Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that's just such a fun dynamic to play with. And he was animated really well. And
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. It's really, really useful. So
great.
Are we getting at 20 minutes there?
Yeah, that was actually live.
You were about to tell me about.
I was about to tell you about. Okay, so there was In the beginning of all of our games, there's this moment where we featured the Toys for Bob logo. We called it the TFB bumper. And when we were doing the first Skylanders, we had, I think, 2 weeks of an open, just right before we were going to go into beta, before we were locking down on everything, that we could do something to update what was, I think, like a 15-year-old logo that had like terrible sound. It wasn't up to snuff at the current time. And one thing that the animation team did was we wanted to reinvent that and tell a different story. And Skylanders is all about bringing toys to life. And we had this amazing new technology of 3D printing. So we're like, man, we should do something with this. How can we update and tell the story? So ultimately, when you look at it, it's actually, you'll see a video of a guy who, just a disembodied hand, who puts Trigger Happy onto the portal, and it comes to life on its own, and it blasts off, and then the Toys for Bob comes out. It's not known, it's not super obvious, but that whole sequence is actually stop motion. And we did that, all of those Trigger Happy frames were printed individually, and we shot that. It was just a passion project for the animators, because we got to do something with their hands. It was such a physical thing. We all love stop motion, and we could literally bring a physical toy to life. And so that's kind of like a little secret hidden gem there. And
It sort of encapsulates the spirit of Skylanders.
yeah, it put a really nice bow onto that first project, which we didn't know it was going to be a big success or a big failure. We just knew it was going to be epic on some proportion.
Good. Well, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.